Meditations on the Tarot, Letter 10, The Wheel of Fortune, Part 2. In the first part of The Wheel of Fortune, the author looked at two terms in a generalized sense: the fall or perdition, and redemption or salvation. In this second part, the author begins by looking at these two terms in much more detail. Firstly, the fall. Here we are confronted with the biblical account of paradise and the 6 days of creation, with the impressive tableau of natural evolution that science advances, with the contours of a majestic outline by the genius of ancient India of Kalpas, Manvantaras and Yugas, a world of periodicity and rhythm, a world dreamt periodically by cosmic consciousness, with the exposition, following the stanzas of Xian, of cosmogony and anthropogeny according to the Indo-Tibetan tradition, given by H. P. Blavatsky in the 3 volumes of her Secret Doctrine. With the grandiose tableau of the spiritual evolution of the world through 7 so-called planetary phases that Rudolf Steiner has bequeathed to the dumbfounded intellectuality of our century. Lastly, with the cosmogonies and eschatologies, explicit or implicit, of Hermes Trismegistus, Plato, the Zohar, and diverse Gnostic schools of the first centuries of our era. May I be permitted to say straight away that, although I have had actual experience of comparing the whole range of these ideas and documents for more than 40 years, I cannot make use of them here in the sense of the treatment which they merit, i.e. to classify them, to extract the essential points of similarity or contrast, to make relevant quotations, etc. If I were to do so, I would drown the essential theme in a sea of secondary elements, secondary with regard to the main theme. Therefore, I have to proceed in the following way. The spirit of all the various ideas and documents enumerated above will be present as a general background, but it will be necessary to refrain from any explicit use of the material which they comprise. Having said this, let us return to the problem of the cosmic fall. Firstly, one can ask, what is the problem, and how does it arise? Let us look at the totality of our experience of the world, personal, historical, biological, etc. What does it say to us? Leibniz, the philosopher of optimism, said that the given world is the most perfect of possible worlds. Schopenhauer, the philosopher of pessimism, said that in the given world the sum of suffering outweighs that of joy, and that the world of our experience is therefore not only imperfect, but also, in the last analysis, evil. Both Leibniz and Schopenhauer looked at the totality of experience of the world, as we are now seeking to, and what a difference in what they saw. From the point of view of pure thought, which is that of Leibniz, the totality of the world shows up without any doubt a perfect arrangement of equilibrium, a harmonious functioning of its essential parts, and, despite what may take place in its more obscure nooks and crannies, the totality of the world taken in its great outlines, in its essential outlines, is harmony itself. From the point of view of pure will, which is that of Schopenhauer, the experience of each individual being in the world confirms the diagnosis of the world given by Gautama Buddha, which diagnosis is therefore to be accepted as true. And from the point of view of the heart, which is that of Hermeticism and the Judeo-Christian tradition, what can one say about the world? The heart says to us, the cosmos, this marvel of wisdom, beauty and goodness, suffers. It is ailing. This great organism, which cannot have been born out of sickness, whose birth must have been due to perfect health, i.e. to perfect wisdom, beauty and goodness, the totality of which was its cradle. This great organism is ailing. The continents and the planets grow ever more hard, petrifying. This is the sclerosis of the cosmos. And on the surface of its land masses, in the process of petrification, and in the deeps of the seas and in the air, there reigns the struggle for existence. This is the fever of inflammation in the world. But sick as it is, the world still retains, everywhere and always, characteristics of its primordial health, and shows the working of forces of its new health, its convalescence. because alongside the struggle for existence there is cooperation in order to live, and alongside the mineral petrification there is the succulent and breathing cover of the plant kingdom. The world can therefore be lauded and wept for at the same time. This is the origin of the problem of the fall, that the world is worthy of being sung for and wept for at the same time. The world is not what it should be. There is a contradiction between the totality and the details. For whilst the starry heavens represent a harmony of equilibrium and perfect cooperation, animals and insects devour one another, and innumerable legions of infectious microbes bear sickness and death to men, animals, and plants. It is this contradiction which the term the fall alludes to. In the first place, it designates a state of affairs in the world which gives the impression that the world is composed of two independent, if not opposed, worlds, as if in the organism of the great world of the harmony of the spheres there is interpolated another world with its own laws and evolution, as if a cancerous outgrowth has taken place in the otherwise healthy organism of the great world. Science takes the two worlds together and considers them as inseparably united, and names this totality nature, nature with two faces, nature benign and cruel at one and the same time, nature both stubborn and astonishingly cooperative, wise and blind nature, nature the loving mother and the cruel stepmother, full of malice. With all due respect to science, it is necessary to draw attention to a quite simple error of thought that it commits. Notably, it commits the same error that a doctor would commit if he were to consider a state of sickness, e.g. cancer, as normal or natural, and if he were to declare that the cancerous process, as well as the circulation of the blood, were two aspects of the nature of the organism of the sick person. This would be something monstrous if the doctor refused to distinguish between nature and counter-nature, or sickness, in the organism of the patient. Yet this is precisely what science does with regard to the world organism. It refuses to distinguish between nature and counter-nature, health and sickness, natural evolution and evolution contrary to nature. The ancients always knew that there is an anomaly in the state of the world. Whether they attributed it to the principle of ignorance, or avidya, as in ancient India, or to the principle of darkness, or Ahriman, as in ancient Persia, or again to the principle of evil or Satan, as the ancient Semites did, is not important. It is always a matter of distinction between the natural world and the unnatural world, between the natural and the perverse, between health and sickness. It goes without saying that Hermeticism, in accordance with the Judeo-Christian tradition, regards the nature of science not as the world created by God, but rather as the field where the created world meets with the world of the serpent. The world of the serpent. This is the world within the world which gave rise to the dualism of Zoroastrianism, Manichaeism, and certain Gnostic schools. These kinds of dualism fall under the title of heresy, i.e. they sin against the essential truths of salvation, because they commit the same error as modern science, but in an inverse sense. Just as science refuses to distinguish in nature between the nature of orthogenesis and cooperation on the one hand, and the nature producing genetic impasses and parasites on the other hand, so did the Manichaeans, Cathars, Albigenses, etc. refuse to distinguish between virginal nature and fallen nature. But whilst science considers its nature, although nature is a contradiction in herself, as the sovereign queen of evolution, who has managed to lead evolution from the albuminous cell to the developed brain of Homo sapiens, the radical dualists considered their nature as being evil through and through. In other words, science considers nature, in the last analysis, good. The Manichaeans regard nature as evil. Science refuses to see Satan there. The radical dualists wanted to see nothing but Satan there. But let us return to the world of the serpent. The most general characteristic feature of this world is enfoldment, whilst the most general characteristic feature of the created world is unfoldment, blossoming, and radiation. Thus, the brain and intestines in the animal kingdom are due to enfoldment. Foliage, branches, and flowers are expressions of the contrary tendency in the plant kingdom. Thus, for example, foliage is the lung of the plant, unfolded and open to the air, whilst the animal or human lung is infolded foliage. Or another example, the sun is in a state of radiation, whilst the planets are in a state of condensation, i.e. enfoldment. These two tendencies have their traditional designations. They are light and darkness, i.e. radiation and enfoldment, respectively. This is why the Gospel according to John, in describing the cosmic drama, says, "Light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness apprehendeth it not." John 1:5. Apprehendeth it not. This expresses that the light was not caught up in the whirlwind of enfoldment, and is not obscured by it, but shines in the darkness. This is the quintessence of the Gospel, the good news. Thus the sun and the stars are to the planets, including the earth, as light is to darkness. And in the microcosm, the system of lotus flowers is to the system of endocrine glands as light is to darkness. For the lotus flowers are fundamentally blossoming glands, whilst the glands are enfolded lotus flowers. The endocrinal glands are precipitates of the lotus flowers in the microcosm, just as the planets are precipitates of the planetary spheres in the macrocosm or planetary system. Now, the world of the serpent is that of enfoldment. The serpent biting his tail and thus forming a closed circle is its symbol. Completely successful enfoldment would be hell or the state of complete isolation. But complete enfoldment or accomplished isolation has in no way succeeded in the world. The history of so-called natural evolution traces for us a tableau of successive attempts, none of which have been successful, aiming at establishing through complete enfoldment a viable organism with an absolutely autonomous consciousness, without falling to prey to madness. Is not the atom an entity produced by enfoldment, which is autonomous and independent? But atoms associate themselves with one another in molecules. Is the molecule, therefore, not an autonomous entity? Well, molecules associate themselves into mysterious fraternities of life that we name organic cells. Then there are the innumerable associations of molecules in the organism. The history of the evolution of living organisms is that of the triumph of the principle of association and cooperation over that of dissociation and isolation. The latter has succeeded in forming only non-viable monsters, e.g. the dinosaurs and giant reptiles which overran the earth and which had their uncontested reign for 100 million years of the Mesozoic or reptile era. Where are they now? They were only a great biological impasse, therefore they perished. Their reign gave way to that of mammals and birds. The former also produced many forms of impasse before an upsurge of vertebrates came, during the advance of which form after form was rejected, condemned either to a rapid or a slow extinction, until the primates, from which one subdivision, that of Homo sapiens, took possession of the earth, and now rules without rival. Thus our planet, which was in the Mesozoic era the planet of reptiles, has now become the planet of human beings. Is the human being the granddaughter of the reptile? Or, in biblical terms, are human beings the children of the serpent, the children of darkness, the product of enfoldment? Or are they children of the light? Luke 16:8. Man has the most developed brain. Now the brain is, as Henry Bergson has shown, an organ which plays the role of a sieve with respect to consciousness. It is an instrument of knowledge and ignorance at one and the same time. Its function is to admit on behalf of consciousness what is appropriate to it, and not to admit, to forget, what is not appropriate to it from the point of view of action, or the will aspiring to action. The brain is therefore an organ of selection, the epitome of the process of evolution. For what the brain does is essentially what took place during millions of years of biological evolution. The whole of evolution is the process of the sequence, creation, selection, rejection, forget, repeated incessantly. The proper forms are chosen, the others are rejected. There is an invisible sieve at work. Now this sieve has become visible, it has become flesh, it is the brain. Henry Bergson says concerning the brain, "In the work of thought in general, as in the particular case of memory, the brain appears to be charged simply with the task of impressing on the body the movements and attitudes which act what the mind thinks, or what the circumstances invite it to think. I have expressed this by saying that the brain is an organ of pantomime. Indeed, the cerebral phenomena are to the mental life just what the gestures of the conductor are to the symphony. They mark out the motor articulations, they do nothing else. In other words, we should find nothing of the higher workings of the mind within the cerebral cortex. Except its sensory functions, the brain has no other part than to mime, in the full meaning of the term, the mental life." Henry Bergson, Mind Energy, pages 74 to 75. The brain is therefore an organ effecting mimicry, choosing what it is going to mime. It mimes accordingly. Now, relevant mimicry is precisely what the book of Genesis understands by cunning, when it says that the serpent was more cunning than any other wild creature that the Lord God had made. Genesis 3:1. It is, as it were, the psychological principle of the serpent, just as enfoldment and movement in a closed circle is its dynamic principle. To be cunning is to mime wisdom, after having eliminated the essential, its light, and then to make use of it for one's own ends. This is why it is said that the devil is the ape of God, that he apes God. The brain is therefore due to the serpent. It is the work of the serpent, and mankind, as the animal species endowed with the most developed brain, is certainly a granddaughter of the serpent. Human beings, as cerebral beings, are indeed children of the serpent, or children of darkness. This is why there exists a kind of brotherly piety with which the serpent is venerated in various places in the world: Egypt, India, the sacred Nagas, Mexico, Central America, and lastly China, where the sacred reptile is venerated in its flying form, that of the dragon. Even Moses erected a bronze serpent on a pole in the desert, and it was only in the time of the reign of Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah, that worship of the serpent was put to an end, notably when Hezekiah broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for until those days, i.e. during all the centuries of judges and kings until Hezekiah, the people of Israel had burned incense to it. It was called Nehushtan. 2 Kings 18:4. But many centuries later, a Gnostic sect, the Narsenes, or Nahashines, worshipped the serpent in the same region, and this was after Jesus Christ. Even in the 19th and 20th centuries, several occultist writers have striven to restore the cult of the serpent, this time in an intellectual form. Thus H.P. Blavatsky did much in her Secret Doctrine to honor the serpent as the philosophical idea of ancient wisdom. She interpreted it as the principle of universal energy, or Fohat, which has a unique and indispensable place between the universal intellect, or Mahat, and universal matter, or Prakriti. She evoked the ancient legends and traditions of the teachers of childlike humanity, who were the creators of civilization, the sons of the serpent, the benefactors of mankind at the dawn of its history. Eliphas Levi presented the serpent as the great magical agent, i.e. the intermediary principle between consciousness and the world of objective facts. According to him, the serpent is the principle of realization, i.e. that which in practice translates the will into events, that which objectifies the subjective. Stanislas de Guaita dedicated his unfinished work to the serpent by giving it the title Le Serpent de la Genèse. In this book he portrays the reality of the role of the great magical agent in history. As to the Theosophical Society, the serpent biting its tail, with a hexagram and Egyptian Tau within the closed circle of the serpent, was chosen as its symbol and seal, accompanied by the motto of the Maharajas of Benares, Satyat Nasti Paro Dharma, there is no religion higher than truth. Yes, the serpent is indeed the great magical agent, that is to say, the principle which mimes consciousness, and which is therefore the link between the subjective and the objective, just as the brain is the link between consciousness and action. Yes, the first representatives of cerebral intellectuality, the sons of the serpent of ancient legends, were certainly the first masters of newborn civilization. It is certainly they who taught the rudiments of the arts and sciences to childlike humanity. Having admitted this, I nevertheless ask myself, is the serpent, as the great magical agent, the only magical agent, and is he the magical agent of all magic? Does divine or sacred magic, which we have referred to in the letters relating to the third and fifth arcana of the tarot, make use of the same agency as that of fakirs, hypnotists, magnetic healers, and necromancers? Now, centuries of experience show that there is not only another agent and another magic, but also that there is another consciousness and experience than that due to the brain. It was not the serpent that John the Baptist saw descend upon the master of sacred magic, the greatest thaumaturgist of history, but rather a dove. John bore witness, I saw the Spirit descend as a dove from heaven, and it remained on him. John 1:32. Several days later, the miracle of the wedding at Cana was accomplished. The 7 miracles, the wedding at Cana, the healing of the nobleman's son, the healing of the sick man at the pool of Bethesda, the feeding of the 5,000, the walking on water, the healing of the man born blind, and the raising of Lazarus, did not have the serpent as their agent, nor was the brain the instrument of their accomplishment, nor was cerebral intellectuality the source of their initiative. The agent here is the dove, i.e. the spirit which is above the brain, above the head, and which descends upon the head and remains there, the spirit which transcends cerebral intellectuality. This spirit is the source of initiative, and simultaneously is the agent and instrument of divine or sacred magic. Therefore I ask myself, and I ask you, dear unknown friend, why occultist authors have not directed their zeal, fervour, and ability to serve the cause of the dove instead of that of the serpent? Why have they not recognized the great agent of sacred magic, which has certainly demonstrated that it is called to illumine, heal, and transform the world? Why did the Theosophical Society, which values truth above all belief, not choose the dove of the Holy Spirit as its standard? Why was the dove of the Holy Spirit, which is the very principle of universal spirituality, not chosen instead of the serpent biting its tail? Why did Stanislas de Gaeta not write a book entitled The Dove of the Gospel? Why did Eliphas Levi not refer to the new great magical agent, the dove, which is called to replace the ancient magical agent, the serpent? Why did H.P. Blavatsky refuse to see that there are 2 principles of cosmic energy, that of Fohat, or the energy of the serpent, and that of the Holy Spirit, or the energy of salvation? Even if the stanzas of Xian do not make any mention of it, are they to be taken as the only source of truth? And is the testimony of prophets, apostles, and saints for over 3,000 years for nothing? I am perplexed, I repeat, not because the interpretation of the serpent according to the above-mentioned occultist authors is not true, in what it essentially concerns, but because the subject of the serpent is treated by them with a strange exclusiveness, even partiality, that is difficult to explain by objective facts referring to the problem as such, without recourse to psychological factors. Be that as it may, there is a rather pronounced tendency in occult literature to present the serpent as the sole principle of realization, and even as the sole principle of knowledge, including occult knowledge. Now, with respect to ourselves, we are able, in the first place, to see in the serpent only the principle of cerebration, cerebral intellectuality, and the principle of enfoldment, the tendency to form closed circles, or in other words, the principle of the fall. I say in the first place because, thanks to the work of salvation, which has a millennial-old history, a gradual spiritualization of the work of the serpent, including cerebral intellectuality, has taken place, and because intervention from above not only frustrates the formation of completely closed circles, but also gives to the tendency of enfoldment a direction towards solidarity through stages such as the family, the nation, and the community of civilization. In other words, providence sees to it that the circles formed by the serpent are not entirely closed, and that the series of its circles is changed into a series of as many spirals. But the benefits of this gradual metamorphosis of the work of the serpent are not due to the serpent, but rather to the other principle, the contrary principle, that of the light which shines in the darkness. For the reality and entirety of evolution consists on the one hand of the enfolding activity of the serpent, which has formed the brain and produced cerebral intellectuality, and on the other hand of the activity of the light from above, which opens the enfolded and illumines cerebral intellectuality. The serpent and the dove, these are, in the last analysis, the factors underlying the whole process of evolution. If you were to ask me, dear unknown friend, if one has to choose and take the side of either the serpent or the dove, my reply would be in the framework of the Master's counsel. Be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Matthew 10:16. i.e., that one should try to unite cerebral intellectuality with spiritual spontaneity. It is certainly necessary to think in articulated thoughts and in a discursive manner, but above this process of discursive thought there always soars the ideal. It is in the light of the ideal that one should think. But let us return to the question, are human beings children of the serpent, or children of the light? We have said that human beings, as the animal species endowed with the most developed brain, are children of the serpent. Now, it is necessary to add that as beings aspiring to the ideal of the good, the beautiful and the true, human beings are children of the light. Because, whatever may be said in the contrary sense, there is no reason, nor is there anything given in the whole domain of biological evolution, culminating in the formation of the human brain, which explains and makes the human aspiration towards truth, beauty and goodness appear necessary. Every monastery and convent is, moreover, a direct contradiction to the thesis that mankind is only the product of biological evolution. All renunciation of concrete things, such as wealth, power, health, and even life, for an ideal, bears witness to the trans-evolutionary and trans-cerebral reality of the nucleus of the human being. If the excavations carried out by paleontologists supply skulls and skeletons as evidence of the biological evolution leading to the human brain, the martyrs throughout history bear witness at the same time to the fact of the transcendence of the nucleus of human nature with respect to biological evolution. This is because complete evolution is the intersection of biological evolution and spiritual evolution. The fact of the intersection of these two quite different domains is the reality of the fall. The other term of the cosmic drama with which we are occupied, and which is linked to that of the fall, is redemption. We have said above that redemption is the cosmic act of the reintegration of the fallen world, first in creating an opening in its closed circle, religion, initiation, prophecy, then in instituting a path of exit, or Buddhas, and entrance, or avatars, through this door, and lastly in transforming the fallen world from within by the radiation of the incarnated Word, or Jesus Christ. Thus, the thesis that we are advancing here is that the work of salvation leading to actual redemption is universal concerning both time and space. For it has acted since the cradle of mankind's history, and it extends to all groups and all religions of mankind. The centuries are its stages, and the whole of mankind was and is its field. The work of salvation is Catholic in the literal, Hermetic, magical, Gnostic, and mystical sense of the word. This means to say that the history of the suffering, militant, and triumphant Church is as long as that of humanity, and that it is as vast as humanity itself. For the Word is the true light that enlightens every man coming into the world, John 1:9, i.e. every human being, always and everywhere. There is therefore only a single work of salvation, which includes all human endeavour, truly aiming at transcending the brain and cerebral intellectuality, and which includes all true revelations from above, throughout all the ages of the history of mankind. It operates in stages, from the first altar erected somewhere on a hill or in the corner of a field, to the great cathedrals of Europe aspiring to heights of consciousness above the sphere of cerebral intellectuality. It has been in stages. The stages of the work of universal salvation constitute the spiritual history of mankind, which is the great universal Bible of which the historical Bible is a part. It can be summarized in two ways according to two different points of view, from the point of view of revelation and that of operation. According to the first point of view, mankind's spiritual history could be summarized, as the Kabbalah does, by giving the various aspects of God that are revealed successfully in the spiritual history of mankind. The 10 names of God of the Kabbalah, which correspond to the 10 Sephiroth of the Sephiroth tree, represent a summary of mankind's spiritual history from the point of view of the gradual revelation of God. For, from the aspect represented by the name Adonai, or Lord, to the aspect indicated by the name Ehe, or I am, there is a long road, the former name being a term for the superiority of power, pure and simple, whilst the latter name signifies intuition of the being who is the essence of being, or he who is. According to the point of view of the operation of the work of salvation, one could summarize mankind's spiritual history by describing its stages from the first opening of the closed circle of the serpent to the advent and blossoming of the reign of God within this circle. The stages in question are, therefore, the opening of the closed circle, the path of exit and entrance through this door, and the incarnation of the Word. The first stage, that of the opening of the closed circle, makes way for the entrance of faith into incarnated mankind. The second brings it hope. The third kindles love within it, which is the active presence of divine life at the heart of the circle of the serpent. All that mankind had been believing, had been hoping, has become reality in the present. This is the essence of the whole spiritual history of mankind in a single phrase. But this summary comprises a world of events. It includes the first awakening of memories of paradise in souls immersed in the darkness of the struggle for existence, the institution of worship or cult to guard these memories and to protect them from being forgotten, the arising of priests charged with this cult, and of seers and prophets who keep it alive and develop it, the arising of schools of individual effort aspiring to trans-cerebral experience, the glorious news that such endeavour is not in vain, that there is a path of exit, the teachings of the Buddhas, the masters of this path, the revelations of the avatars, rishis, great masters and men of God, demonstrating the reality of the path of entrance, manifestation and incarnation, the spiritual preparation in the whole world, and the real preparation in a chosen people, Israel, of the incarnation prefigured by the incarnations and manifestations of avatars and bodhisattvas on the path to Buddhahood, then the incarnation itself, and lastly all that is implied in St. Paul's words. Great indeed, we confess, is the mystery of our religion. He was manifested in the flesh, vindicated in the spirit, seen by angels, preached among the nations, believed on in the world, and taken up in glory. 1 Timothy 3:16. Now, what is generally understood by evolution is due to the concurrence of two principal lines of operation, that of the serpent and that of the work of salvation. Principal, I say, because there are also secondary lines which play an intermediary role between the principal lines, such as, for example, the line of evolution of individual souls by way of repeated incarnations. This subject has been considered in a preceding letter, letter 4, and will be considered again in the 13th letter. We draw attention here in the context of general evolution only to the following fact. Science is at present confronted with the problem of the transmission, by way of heredity, of characteristics acquired through experience. This problem, such as it is presented today, is due to the paradoxical contradiction between what is known of the law of heredity and what is known about evolution and progress in general. Notably, it has been found that acquired characteristics do not transmit themselves by heredity, and, on the other hand, the sum total of facts concerning general evolution provides evidence of progress. In order to resolve the contradiction between heredity, which only reproduces, and general evolution, which demonstrates creativity, it is necessary to have recourse to a further dimension, i.e., to add the vertical dimension to that of horizontal continuity in time, the latter dimension being that of heredity, which connects successive generations. It has to be admitted that acquired characteristics are accumulated somewhere else, other than by way of the mechanism peculiar to heredity, and that between heredity and acquired characteristics, which latter do not disappear, but are simply relegated somewhere else, there is an active tension which manifests itself in education and self-education, as well as in the arising of intellectual and moral geniuses as fruits of a mediocre line of forefathers. This tension between the mechanism of heredity and characteristics acquired through experience and accumulated somewhere else leads in the long run to the prevalence of the latter, and a kind of eruption of acquired characteristics takes place in the hereditary mechanism. The fruits of past experience, so to say, reincarnate. It is thus that one is led to postulate the principle of reincarnation, and when modern depth psychology of the school of Jung adds sufficient material concerning the resurgence of past experiences in dreams, vision, and in the life of fantasy of people who, in their normal consciousness, know nothing about it, and thus, for example, the rituals and symbols of the ancient mysteries reappear in the full light of day of the 20th century, then the postulate necessary to explain the possibility of progress ceases to be solely a postulate, but becomes a conclusion, based on experience and endowed with a high degree of probability. It is true that Jung designated the realm where past experiences are buried as the collective unconscious. But why collective? Why not individual unconscious? Is it simply because experiences of the past, which arise from the depths of consciousness, have much in common, that they resemble one another? But it is human beings in whom these experiences of the past arise. It is therefore quite natural that they have much in common, in fact as much in common as human beings have in common. For this reason alone, it is necessary to postulate the collectivity of subconscious or superconscious memory that spans millennia. Is it not more simple and natural to conclude that the one who remembers an experience is also the one who experienced it? But to do justice to Jung, it should be pointed out that he did not insist on a substantial collectivity to his collective unconscious. As a true scientist, he leaves open the question whether the collective unconscious is a reservoir common to mankind, or whether it is a totality derived by synthesizing characteristics common to individuals. The metaphysics, so to say, of the collective unconscious was but little elaborated by Jung. Be that as it may, the facts that Jung assembled and presented lend themselves at least as easily to interpretation in terms of reincarnation as in terms of a collective unconscious. But for the inner form of consciousness, and I remind you, dear unknown friend, that these letters are addressed only to your inner forum, and that on principle they do not aim to advance doctrines of general, i.e. scientific validity. It is the experience within the depths of your own soul which has the last word on the problem of individual reincarnation, and it is to this that the task falls of transforming the possibility and probability of reincarnation into certainty. Certainty in the inner forum of consciousness, of course. There are, therefore, three continuities in evolution: biological or hereditary continuity, psychic continuity or reincarnation, and spiritual continuity or the work of salvation. Note that these three lines of continuity correspond to the dynamic triangle to which Fabre d'Olivet reduced the history of the human race, the triangle destiny, will, providence. Heredity corresponds to destiny or fate, reincarnation to will or freedom, and the work of salvation to providence. This is what he says concerning this triangle. Quote, "But if man is at first only a power in germ which civilization must develop, whence will come to him the indispensable principles of this culture? I reply that it will be from the two powers to which he finds himself linked and of which he must form the third. These two powers, between which he finds himself placed, are destiny and providence. Beneath him is destiny, natura naturata, or necessitated nature. Above him is providence, natura naturans, or free nature. He is himself, as kingdom of man, the mediatory will, the effective force, placed between these two natures to serve them as a link, a means of communication, and to unite two actions, two movements, which would be incompatible without him. The three powers which I have just named constitute the universal ternary. Nothing escapes their action. All in the universe is subject to them, all except God himself, who, enveloping them in his unfathomable unity, forms with them the sacred tetrad of the ancients, that immense quaternary, which is all in all and outside of which there is nothing. Fabre de Olivet, L'Histoire philosophique du genre humain, pages 40 to 41. I permit myself to add to this quotation from Fabre de Olivet that during my whole life I have not succeeded in finding a more lucid formula and a more effective general key for understanding the evolution and history of mankind than that given by Fabre de Olivet. However, the century and a half which has elapsed since his work and the growth of knowledge concerning mankind's history which has been achieved in this lapse of time, and also the unfortunate bias of Fabre de Olivet, which blinded him with respect to certain mysteries of Christianity, has forced me to revise the application by Fabre de Olivet of his praiseworthy general principles concerning concrete problems and details of the history of mankind. The same remark is applicable also to St. Ives de Alvedre, above all to his work Mission des Juifs, the mission of the Jews, excepting the anti-Christian bias, which is not to be found with him. Heredity, reincarnation, and the work of salvation, reincarnation being the intermediary principle between the other two, therefore together constitute the cosmic drama of evolution. The 10th card of the tarot, in evoking this whole problem, gives a cross-section through the middle of the problem of evolution by portraying the aspect of most practical significance, i.e. the relationship between animality or animal nature and humanity or human nature. The Sphinx above the wheel represents animality and humanity united, either still not differentiated or already reintegrated. The enigma of the Sphinx is therefore that of the humanization of animality and the animalization of humanity. The dog ascending towards the Sphinx represents animality aspiring to union with humanity. The monkey descending represents the process of the animalization of humanity. It is a matter, therefore, of the arcanum of the practical solution of the problem, how to accomplish, without eradication or rejection, a wholeness of the human and animal elements in the human personality, without the former animalizing, or becoming monkey, or the latter falling under the tyrannical domination, becoming dogs, of the former. Or, in other words, how to descend into the animal element without becoming animalized, and how to make an ascent without the coercion of animality to the human element. Now, the 10th Arcanum is also strictly practical. It is a spiritual exercise which has the aim of awakening an arcanum, i.e. skilled knowledge of a certain know-how. And the know-how of which it is a matter with the 10th Arcanum is the right way of handling on the one hand the elements of animalized man which proceed away from a centre, and on the other hand those elements of animality aspiring to humanity which strive towards a stable centre. This stable centre is the Sphinx, placed above the wheel of animality, i.e. above the automatic movement in man's psychic nature. The wheel and the Sphinx above it. What practical task does this context suggest? The following. There is created animality, and there is evolved animality. The former had its origin before the fall, and the latter owes its existence to evolution since the fall, i.e. to the work of the serpent. There is the animality created by the divine word of which the Gospel of John says that all things were made through him, and nothing that was made without him. John 1:3. and of which Moses' book of Genesis speaks in terms of the creation of animals according to their kinds, Genesis 1:24, on the 5th and 6th days of the creation. The animality of divine origin is summarized by the 4 prototypes or kinds of the holy Heoth, or cherubim. These are the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the angel or man. And if one unites these 4 prototypes in one sole being, one obtains the Sphinx. The Sphinx is therefore the prototype synthesis of holy animality, i.e. divine instinctivity, or the principle of spontaneous obedience to God. For holy animality means nothing other than spontaneous obedience to God, or divine instinct. The other instincts are due to the evolution of the serpent. They are summarized by the term bestiality. Therefore, there are instincts of divine origin and there are bestial instincts. Thus, the instinct which leads to elevation of the spirit and of the heart is symbolized by the eagle, which iconographic tradition represents as the inspirative principle, or channel of divine inspiration, of John the Evangelist. At the same time, the eagle as the prototype of the bird of prey represents the instinct of aggression and lightning attack. It is the eagle as the instinct of rapaciousness which figured as the inspiring principle on the standards of the Roman legions. Similarly, the lion symbolizes the instinct that can be designated as moral courage. The martyrs were representatives of the lion, and it is the lion as moral courage which is associated with the evangelist Mark in Christian iconography. But just as there is the eagle and the eagle, so there is the lion and the lion. Ferociousness is to moral courage as the lion is to the lion. The former is a degeneration of the latter. The bull is the symbol of the instinct of productive concentration. It underlies the propensity to give meditation. It is the channel of divine inspiration of the evangelist Luke. It is the bull in this sense which has given rise to the cult of the sacred cow, the female aspect of the bull, in India. The worship of the cow in India is simply a popular counterpart to the Hindu propensity for meditation. But again, there is the bull and the bull. The latter is a degeneration of the former. It is concentration of the will on a single thing, rendering the subject blind to everything else. In sacrificing the bull in the Mithraic mysteries, it was not intended that the propensity to meditation be killed, but rather that impetuosity, rage which blinds, be slain. The evangelist Matthew, according to iconography, has the angel or man as inspiring companion, who represents the propensity to objectivity, which is manifested, for example, in the truthfulness of an epic narrative made by an annalist or chronicler. But there is objectivity and objectivity. One can be objective, i.e. impartial, in taking everything equally to heart, and one can be objective or impartial in assuming an attitude of equal indifference towards everything. The former is angelic objectivity, the latter is its degeneration. It is that of cold and heartless observation. The former manifests itself by means of the instinct that we call conscience. The latter is manifested in what many take to be the scientific spirit, and which, truth to tell, is only the propensity towards cynicism. Thus we have a comparative array of the principal instincts of divine origin and those that have originated since the fall. Now the practical task which follows from this is that of inner alchemy, the transmutation of fallen instincts into their non-fallen prototypes, i.e. the transmutation of eagle into eagle, of lion into lion, of bull into bull, and of man into angel. Or, in other words, the task is to establish or re-establish the Sphinx above the wheel of instinctivity, to transform the wheel of psychic automatism into the Sphinx. How is this done? By way of metamorphosis, i.e. by alternating contraction and expansion, just as the growth of a plant is the manifestation of two tendencies, a vertical tendency and a horizontal tendency, operating alternately, so that the former pushes upwards and the latter effects its blossoming out. So does psychic metamorphosis operate by restriction of the expansive tendency, which results in elevation, followed by expansion on the new plane attained by elevation, which, in turn, will be followed by restriction, resulting in a new elevation, and so on. This is the law of metamorphosis which Goethe ascertained and studied in the plant realm, and it is also the law of transmutation of psychic forces, the narrow way, or the way of the cross, in the human kingdom. For human beings and plants live under the law of the cross, the latter organically, the former spiritually. For this reason the plant is a manual of practical Hermeticism, where one can read the immutable laws of spiritual principle. Schiller, the brother of Goethe, understood this, which is why he said, "Dost thou seek the highest, the greatest? The plant can show it thee. What the plant is unconsciously, be thou intentionally. That's it." This is because the plant kingdom is the most virginal realm of nature following the fall, and because man is on the way to the reintegration. Every garden, therefore, preserves something of the Garden of Eden, and can serve as a living library for someone aspiring to salvation. Now, it is a matter of extending the law of the cross, which rules the plant realm organically, and the human kingdom spiritually, to the animal kingdom also. And this must be done not by training dogs, horses, and parrots, but rather by applying the law of the cross to the inner animality in man's psychic life. It is necessary to restrain the bull in us in order to elevate it to the bull. This means to say that the instinctive desire which shows itself as rage concentrated upon a single thing, and which blinds one to everything else, is to be restrained and thus elevated to the propensity for profound meditation. This entire operation is summarized in Hermeticism by the words, "to be silent." The precept to be silent is not, as many authors interpret it, solely a rule of prudence, but it is moreover a practical method of transforming this narrowing and blinkering instinct into a propensity towards depth, and, correspondingly, an aversion towards all that is of a superficial nature. The winged bull is therefore the result obtained by the procedure of being silent. This means to say that the bull is elevated to the level of the eagle and is united with it. A marriage of the impetus towards the heights and the propensity towards depth is effected by this union. The marriage of opposites, this traditional theme of alchemy, is the essence of the practice of the law of the cross. For the cross is the union of two pairs of opposites, and the practice of the cross is the work of conciliation of four opposites, two horizontal and two vertical opposites. The eagle and the bull are vertical opposites. They are the tendencies towards the heights and the depths, towards the general and the particular, towards a comprehensive overview, and towards the minutiae of points of detail. The angel and the lion constitute the other pair of opposites on the cross of man's instinctivity. Here it is a matter of the transformation of combative courage into moral courage, into the courage of conscience. For the instinct that we call moral conscience is the effective inspiration on the part of the angel, and it is by elevating instinctual courage, i.e. the desire for heroism, adventure, and struggle, that the latter is united with conscience and becomes the moral courage that we admire in martyrs and saints. The winged lion is the result to be obtained by the procedure signified by the term to dare, which implies moral courage. Just as the bull becomes winged through its conjunction with the eagle by the practice of to be silent, and just as the eagle acquires the constancy and perseverance of the bull thanks to the practice of to will, so does the lion acquire wings through its conjunction with the angel by the practice of to dare, and the effective inspiration of the angel, which one's daring produces, becomes spontaneous certainty by the practice signified by the term to know. These are therefore the four lines of endeavour with a view to achieving the task symbolized by the Sphinx: to be silent, to will, to dare, and to know. To be silent is the restriction of the will which elevates itself, following the law of the cross as a consequence of this restriction. Then it has its expansion on another plane. There it becomes the true to will. Constant attention to conscience restrains impulsiveness, and this latter is therefore raised to a new plane where it has its expansion. The disciplining of impulsiveness by conscience is the practical sense of to dare and to know. For it is only in harmony with knowledge due to conscience that impulsiveness becomes a legitimate daring or moral courage. Here is the principle of Hermetic asceticism over the millennia. It is based on the law of the cross. Its aim is the Sphinx, which is animality united with humanity. It is clear that this is a very ancient teaching, and that the 10th Arcanum goes back to ancient Hermeticism before our era. We are put into contact with the ideas of those who erected the Sphinx and the pyramids. It is intrinsic evidence, not iconographic and historical evidence, which leads us to this conclusion. And what reinforces this, moreover, is what is missing from the 10th card. It presents us the wheel of animality and the Sphinx as the solution to the practical problem of animality. Now, a more profound and sustained analysis of the Sphinx and of the whole context of the card leads us inevitably to 4 animals and to all that this comprises: divine and fallen animality, the fall and the reintegration, the principle of practical asceticism, etc. All this can be amplified by the facts and knowledge that modern history, biology and psychology supply us with. But one essential thing is lacking from this card. This is the quinta essentia, the 5th essence, which would make the Sphinx a reality for us, but which is not the Sphinx itself. The active principle of the cross, the 5th essence, without which the whole operation cannot be practiced and would remain only knowledge and hope, is not to be found indicated here. The Sphinx figures here as the last solution, or rather as the last enigma. The absence of a direct indication, for indirectly the whole card relates to the enigma of the Sphinx, and through this very fact, to the 5th essence, in the context of the card of the principle of the new Adam, who is the 5th essence, as we know today equally in esotericism and exotericism, indicates the pre-Christian origin of the 10th card. From the point of view of iconography, it is clearly medieval, or of the late Middle Ages, as all the other cards are, but intrinsically it is older, notably pre-Christian. Is it the oldest, or is it simply the least evolved of the 22 cards of the major arcana of the tarot? The 22 cards of the major arcana of the tarot being an organism, a complete whole, it is not a question of diverse and disparate origins of particular cards, but rather of the degrees of their evolution or transformation. For the tarot also is not a wheel, a closed circle, but rather a spiral, i.e. it evolves through tradition and reincarnation. The authors who saw in the tarot the sacred book of Thoth, Thoth being Hermes, were both right and wrong at the same time. They were right insofar as they traced back the history of the essence of the tarot to antiquity, notably to ancient Egypt. And they were wrong insofar as they believed that the tarot had been inherited from ancient Egypt, i.e. that it had been transmitted from generation to generation, subject to minor iconographic changes. As support for their thesis, the ingenious story or legend that you probably know is recounted concerning the council of Egyptian priests who deliberated on the problem of the preservation of the essence of their wisdom for the generations to come, after the extinguishing of the light of Egypt. Proposition after proposition was rejected, whether to commit the wisdom to paper, stone, metal, etc., and at last it was decided to entrust the wisdom to a less destructible and more stable agent than paper, stone, and metal, i.e. to human vice. Thus a game of cards, the tarot, was devised, which has come down to us. But from an iconographic point of view, the tarot is definitely medieval, and from a historical point of view, there is no evidence that it existed before the end of the 14th century. See Gerard van Rynbeck, Le Tarot, page 48. Therefore, if it is a matter of a popular game, designed to be as such by Egyptian sages, we would have to have a lot of material concerning the tarot, as a card game, during the 14 or at least 10 preceding centuries during which there is a complete silence concerning the tarot. No, the tarot is not inherited. it has reincarnated. It has reincarnated in conformity with the experience of modern depth psychology of the school of Jung, who ascertained the upsurge of ancient and even archaic mysteries and cults from the depths of the unconscious of people in the 20th century. The tarot is the sacred book of Thoth, not inherited or transmitted, but reborn. In support of this thesis, let us make a quotation, this time not from a modern legend, but from the text of a Greek Hermetic treatise of considerable antiquity. This is Kor Kosmu, or Isis teaching her son Horus the mysteries of heaven. Here it is a matter of the sacred book of Thoth concerning its nature and origin. The following is the relevant text. Quote, "As long as the craftsman who made the universe willed not to be known, all was wrapped in ignorance. But when he determined to reveal himself, he breathed into certain godlike men a passionate desire to know him, and bestowed on their minds a radiance ampler than that which they already had within their breasts, so that they might first will to seek the yet unknown God, and then have power to find him. But this, Horus, my wondrous son, it would not have been possible for men of mortal breed to do, if there had not arisen one whose soul was responsive to the influence of the holy powers of heaven. And such a man was Hermes, he who won knowledge of all. Hermes saw all things and understood what he saw, and had power to explain to others what he understood. For what he had discovered he inscribed on tablets, and hid securely what he had inscribed, leaving the larger part untold, that all later ages of the world might seek it. And thus did Hermes speak. And now I must deposit hard by the secret things of Osiris, these holy symbols of the cosmic elements, and after speaking over them a prayer, depart to heaven. It is not fitting, my son, that I should leave this report unfinished. I must tell you all that Hermes said when he was depositing his books. Thus did he speak. Ye holy books, which have been written by my perishable hands, but have been anointed with the drug of imperishability by him who is master over all, remain ye undecaying through all ages, and be ye unseen and undiscovered by all men who shall go to and fro on the plains of this land, until the time when heaven, grown old, shall beget organisms, those that the Creator has named souls, worthy of you. Having spoken this prayer over the work of his hands, Hermes was received into the sanctuary of the everlasting zones." Kor Kosmu, translated by Walter Scott, Hermetica, Volume 1, pages 459 to 461. This is the Greco-Egyptian version of the nature and origin of the sacred book of Thoth. According to this version, the books comprising it were engraved by perishable hands, but have been anointed with the drug of imperishability, and remain deposited undecaying through all ages in the sanctuary of the everlasting zones belonging to Hermes, so that all later ages of the world might seek them. They are therefore inscribed magically in a region between heaven and earth, close enough to the earth to be reached by the souls of seekers on the earth, and to awake in them the spirit of quest through their attraction, and far enough removed on the other hand, so as never to be seized by cerebral intellectuality, i.e. to be taken hold of, analysed and exploited by it. The original of the sacred book of Thoth is to be found in the trans-cerebral region. For this reason it is necessary to seek for it not in crypts, manuscripts or stone inscriptions, not even in secret societies or fraternities, but rather in the sanctuary of the everlasting zones belonging to Hermes. It is necessary to elevate oneself above the zone of cerebral intellectuality, because the sacred books were written, according to the Hermetic treatise that we have quoted, before the formation of the brain. They make an appeal, magically effective across time, throughout all ages, to transcend cerebral intellectuality, and to raise the organisms worthy of them, those that the Creator has named souls, to the region where they remain deposited. This region, this garden of the holy symbols of the cosmic elements, planted between earth and heaven, these magical formulae, Gnostic symbols and mystic fires of the primordial revelation, which constitute the sanctuary above cerebral intellectuality and below heaven, is the reality of Hermeticism. It is an incentive across the ages, stimulating human souls to aspire to the vision of all things, and, having seen this totality, to comprehend it, and having comprehended it, to attain the power of revealing it and showing it. The totality of things, ta sympanta in Greek, this is the soul of Hermeticism across time, throughout all ages. And as the brain is the organ of practical specialization, the appeal and aspiration to the totality of things, or ta sympanta, amounts to an appeal and aspiration to transcend the brain and cerebral intellectuality. Hermeticism haunts mankind from century to century. Is this because of a pleiad of brilliant writers, or because of secret societies, or again because of the attraction towards what is secret in general? It could be. But why are there always writers, and in every epoch? And why are there secret societies? Why, lastly, does the secret itself exercise such an attraction? Because in the depths of the unconscious, which knocks at the door and wants to become conscious, there is present the sanctuary of the everlasting zones, where the sacred book of Thoth remains deposited, from whence symbolic and hermetic works are born or reincarnate. The tarot is such a work. The tarot has its invisible prototype, and the function and mission of the tarot is to elevate the soul to this original. This is why it is a system of spiritual exercises. It gives direction and an impulse to transcend cerebral intellectuality for the soul to penetrate into the sanctuary of the everlasting zones, where the holy symbols of the cosmic elements remain. The totality of things, intuition transcending cerebral intellectuality. Hermeticism. But why Hermeticism? Is this not the aspiration of every metaphysical philosophy and of all religious mystical practice? Certainly the mystical practice of religion transcends cerebral intellectuality, but it does so in order to attain heaven, and not the intermediary zone between heaven and earth, where the primordial revelation of the mysteries of heaven are found deposited. Saints live the light, warmth, and life of heaven. Celestial gold, blue, and white radiate into their lives and through their lives. With respect to Hermeticists, they are called, or should I say condemned, to live neither for the day of earth nor for the day of heaven, but rather are immersed in the night, in the profound darkness of the mystery of relationships between heaven and earth. The thinking which unites heaven and earth, which is immanent equally in every earthly phenomenal structure and every celestial noumenal entity, is that which is the vision and comprehension of the totality of things, as the power to reveal it and show it. Saints do not aspire to cosmic thought, to a comprehension of the totality of things, but rather to divine life. And metaphysicians? Do not idealist philosophers aspire to the totality of things, to grasp it through thought? Plato, the father of metaphysical philosophy, had had the experience of trans-cerebral thinking, of thought that is not conceived but seen. This is why he was able to reach the method of gradual elevation beyond cerebral intellectuality, the elevation from an opinion or doxa, which is possible, to a conclusion or dianoia, which is probable, by way of dialectical argument, and lastly from a probable conclusion to the certainty of immediate perception or episteme. It is through episteme, through immediate perception, that he had the experience of objective thought or cosmic thought that he named the world of ideas. Having had the experience of ideas that are not conceived or invented through subjective cerebral intellectuality, but perceived and contemplated through episteme, Plato committed an error, moreover quite understandable, of peopling the higher sphere of the spiritual world with ideas, although no world of ideas as a separate world or sphere exists. The whole world is peopled only by individual beings, and ideas live and exist only in them, through them, and in relationships between them. Ideas are certainly real, but as an immanent reality, not as a separate reality. Ideas live only in a given consciousness, be it that of God, or of the angelic hierarchies, or of man. But they can also be projected outwards or engraved, as our ancient treatise expresses it, incarnated in symbols and formulae, and thus conserved in the objective spiritual world. This entire operation of the projection, incarnation, and conservation of ideas is called in Hermeticism writing the book. It is of such a book that the Apocalypse speaks when it says, "And I saw in the right hand of him who was seated on the throne a book written within and without, sealed with 7 seals." Revelation 5:1. Such also is the sacred book or books of Thoth, of which Kor Kosmu speaks. Now, Plato, in elevating himself above cerebral intellectuality, had a meeting with the sacred book of Thoth, with the holy symbols of the cosmic elements, which are imperishable and undecaying, and which are in the sanctuary of the everlasting zones belonging to Hermes. As the Hermeticist that he was, he attained to the sanctuary, but as the speculative philosopher that he was also, he failed to appreciate the magical fact of a living spiritual monument, and he gave it an interpretation which was later declined by his disciple Aristotle, which is not magical but rational, in postulating a world of ideas beyond the world of phenomena. Here is the fundamental error of all metaphysical philosophy, from Plato to the present time. It hypostatizes ideas. Ideas live only in the consciousness of individuals, or are present in potency in books, in visibly written books, such as the Holy Scripture, in invisible books, which are living spiritual monuments due to the operation of divine magic, and lastly in the whole world, which is also a great book, containing in potency the ideas of its creation and destiny expressed through the symbolism of facts. This is, therefore, how Hermeticism differs from religious mysticism and metaphysical philosophy. Hermeticism, as the aspiration to the totality of things, is neither a school, nor a sect, nor a community. It is the destiny of a certain class or group of souls. For there are souls who must necessarily aspire to the totality of things, and who are impelled by the river current of thought which never stops, flowing always forward and always further on, without cease. There is no stopping for these souls. They cannot, without renouncing their own lives, leave this river of thought which pours without cease, equally during youth, mature age, and old age, without halting, from one darkness needing to be illumined to another darkness needing to be penetrated. Such was, is, and will be my destiny. And in addressing these letters to the unknown friend, I address myself to he who shares this destiny with me. Monsieur Professor, forgive me this arrogant and immodest, if not puerile in your eyes, aspiration, the aspiration to personal certainty with respect to the totality of things, that you, in the industrious and fertile work that you do, hope to attain only after centuries of the collective endeavour of generations of scientists. But at least know that I am infinitely grateful to you, and that you have in me a disciple always eager to learn from you, with respect and gratitude, and who would never presume to teach you, whatever it may be. Monsieur Priest, pardon me concerning what you think to be human pride which wants to penetrate into the mysteries of God, instead of bowing before divine wisdom and goodness, and accepting with humility, as befits a Christian, the revealed truths of salvation, which, in so far as they are practiced, suffice absolutely for the well-being, happiness, and salvation of the soul. I say this to you now as if at confession. I am unable not to aspire to the depth, the height, and the breadth of comprehensive truth, to comprehension of the totality of things. I have made the sacrifice of the intellect, sacrificium intellectuus, in all sincerity and without reserve, but with an intensification of the life of thought, what increased ardour in the aspiration to spiritual knowledge that has followed. I know that the truths of salvation revealed and transmitted by the counsel of the Holy Church are both necessary and sufficient for salvation, and I have no doubt whatever that they are true, and I strive to do my best to practice them. But I am unable to arrest the current of the river of thought which bears me towards mysteries that perhaps are meant only for saints, perhaps only for angels. In any case, that I know without doubt are reserved for beings more worthy than me. Father, will you grant me absolution? Come what may, I can only echo Jacob's words. I will not let you go until you have blessed me. Genesis 32:26.